Okay, that's 3 o'clock. I'm guessing more and more people will slowly start to join, but I think we might as well get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bear Studies Symposium. We've been setting up for a little bit, but I think hopefully everything is under control now. Uh, Great. Ali, would you like to open us formally?
Good afternoon, everyone, dear colleagues, researchers, students, and all friends of the Bear community. It gives us great pleasure to welcome you all here to the very first Bear Studies Symposium. This event was born from a simple desire to bring together people passionate about discussing and studying the bear community. So, why did we organize this gathering? Well, despite the significant cultural and social impact of the bear community since the 1980s, academic studies in this subject remain scarce and disconnected. And today we create a space for dialogue, a place for knowledge exchange, an opportunity to establish new connection. And just to be clear, we are not interested only in academic perspectives, but also in understanding how this community organizes itself and experiences its rich diversity across different cultures worldwide. This symposium is just the beginning. We plan to organize more events like this one, featuring presentation from many others interested in these subjects. Together, we are building a collaborative network. Looking ahead, we envision also creating a comprehensive mapping project, documenting events, groups, places connected to the Bear history and community across the globe. Today, we are honored to welcome distinguished guests. Our program this afternoon will proceed as follows. First, we will hear from Dr. Les Wright, a renowned scholar of bear culture. This will be followed by Dr. Nick McGlynn from the University of Brighton, my organizer for this event. And concluding our presentation will be historian Vinicius Flauaus, who has studied the bear community in São Paulo, Brazil. We will introduce each speaker properly when they begin their presentation. As for myself, I am Alexandre Almeida, assistant professor at the University of Aveiro in Portugal. My doctoral research investigated online and offline social dynamics among bears in São Paulo, and I look forward to sharing this research with you at a future event. I strongly encourage everyone to actively participate in the discussion following each presentation. This is an inclusive and respectful space where all perspectives and experiences are valued. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our supporters, the Center for Transforming Sexuality and Gender at the University of Brighton, the Center for Language, Literatures and Cultures at the University of Aveiro, and the International Bear History Project. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Welcome to the Bear Studies Symposium. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Nick McGlynn. Thank you, Nick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Nick McGlynn, the other organizer of this symposium. Before I introduce our keynote presenter, I'll quickly give just 4 important reminders about how this symposium will operate. So, first, you are not being held hostage here. Please feel free to take breaks at any time or to leave and return whenever you wish. Second, your microphone will remain switched off, but your camera can be turned on or off by you. There will be some time for questions after every presentation. If you want to ask a question after a presentation, please use the raise hand function, which is at the top of your screen, and then Ali or I will switch your microphone on to ask a question. Or there's a Q&A bar which can be turned on. After every presentation, I will make a post requesting questions, so you can also type them into that as well. There are more people signed up than Ali and I expected, so it is possible, I'm afraid, that we won't get to all of your questions or maybe have quite as much discussion as we expected. But at the end of the symposium, Ali will be sharing details of how you can stay in touch so that we can continue conversations. We only want this to be a starting point rather than the end point. Third, we are recording the 3 presentations. The 3 recorded presentations will be made available online in around a month. Questions and answers will not be recorded in these kind of online recordings. And fourth and finally, if you are using translated captions, please remember not to change the spoken languages in this meeting setting. That will ruin translation for everybody. Only use the translate to setting that is below it. Okay, so now let me introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Les Wright. Les is the world's foremost scholar of bears and of our culture and our history. His 2 edited books from around the millennium, the Bear Book 1 and the Bear Book 2, are very much required reading for anyone interested in bears. And I think it's fair to say that they form the foundation for all research and scholarship on bears. As an independent scholar, Les continues to publish his reflections and research about bears on his website and via his Bear Tracks series in Bear World magazine. He is a founder of the Bear History Project International, and he is currently working on a 3rd bear book to reflect on bears over the past 25 years. So there is no one more appropriate to have as our keynote speaker to talk about bear studies. So please welcome Dr. Les Wright. Les, the floor is over to you.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And thank you, Ali and Nick and the whole team for organizing this. I'm really excited and amazed and grateful to be here, and that all of you are here as well today. Good morning from New York, good afternoon, good evening, and good middle of the night, because I know there are people down in Australia and New Zealand here today, so that really shows dedication. I'm opening my remarks today by posing the question, where do we go from here? As American poet Maya Angelou put it, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. Historians have no doubt been saying this since Herodotus, considered the first historian, wrote down what he saw and the stories he heard during his extensive travels in the Greek world some 2,500 years ago. People typically believe that the world they are born into is how the world has always been. I know that was true for me. I have occasionally spoken to college students in queer history and queer literature classes as a Stonewall era gay activist in the 1970s and as a long-term AIDS survivor. I serve as an eyewitness to what life was like for us queer folks back then in the United States in the bad old days, and I share what it was like to live through the AIDS epidemic at Ground Zero in San Francisco. For good measure, I share what it was like being one of those infected with HIV from the start, as someone who never expected to reach the age of 35. I'm 72 now. Students are learning queer history from books and documentary films. They often react with astonishment, even disbelief, that queer life in the United States had literally been like that. They gain an understanding, appreciation, and respect for their forebears, for what they take for granted had been fought for, and how recent those wins have been. Being a lifelong student of German history, I have also tried to communicate my wariness of how secure these advances are. Hitler erased the first gay community and homophile political movement in the blink of an eye, and he dispatched gay men to his death camps, branded as homosexuals with a pink triangle, and lesbians with a yellow triangle, branding them as asoziale, people who are withdrawn from society, are uncomfortable in social situations, and are hostile to other people. Very imaginative on his part. I am now witnessing my concerns not far from the mark. Jacques Bazin, the French-born American historian, known for his studies of the history of ideas and both high and low cultural history, echoed Herodotus when he said, "There is nothing personal about facts, but there is about choosing and grouping them. It is by the patterning and the meanings ascribed that the vision is conveyed." Linking is particularly important in cultural history because culture is a web of many strands. None is spun by itself, nor is any cut off at a fixed state like wars and regimes. Queer work is inherently political. The first generations of gay and lesbian historians in the United States and in Europe devoted themselves to unearthing or recovering our history. They revealed where we had come from. They undid the erasure from the historical record by a profoundly homophobic culture. Many historians were oblivious to their own blindness to their bias. A few kept the queer parts of the story that they knew a secret, knowing it would not be welcomed or that they might find themselves marginalized and ostracized among their colleagues. As recently as the 1980s, when I was a graduate student at the notably progressive UC Berkeley, all of my gay professors urged me not to do any gay work until after I had tenure, warning me I would destroy my career before it even got started. Nonetheless, I persisted. In the mid-1980s, I unexpectedly found myself, quote unquote, the right person in the right place. Some gay men in San Francisco were starting to call themselves bears. 2 monthly sex parties were organized, Bear Hugs and Leather Bears. Richard Bulger started Bear Magazine, originally a photocopied zine sold in gay bookstores in San Francisco and available by prescription around the world. The Lone Star Saloon opened south of Market, which is the historic leather district in San Francisco, catering to these new bears. Several of these self-identifying bears worked in high tech. They created a listserv for their fellow bears. A listserv was an email address that facilitated cross-communication among a group of people. Everyone emailed the moderator, who then distributed the messages to each person within the list. Many of us fondly remember Steve Dyer's BML, or Bears Mailing List. One night I looked up and surveyed the Bear Hugs orgy I was in the middle of and realized bears were not just that year's fashion in the San Francisco gay community. I began taking notes, collected flyers, bear magazines, and other ephemera. Bear Expo was started as an annual event for bears from all over the world to socialize, network, and sell their wares. Every year, I facilitated a discussion group I called What is a Bear? To this day, there is no agreed upon definition. When I started documenting bears, I followed my friend Alan Berrubi's approach, what he called grassroots history, or history from the bottom up. I captured the voices of participants and observers, letting them tell what they were doing and why. I was adamant about documenting the history as it was unfolding before the inevitable revisioning would change the narrative to suit future purposes. As my trans friend Mildred and later Jeffrey Dykeman, a social anthropologist, often said, quote, "The natives can speak for themselves." The birth of bears, the who, what, when, where, and why of bear identity and bear community is of both historical and symbolic significance. Our Urgeschichte, that is our origins, will remain murky and contested. The earliest mention of bears I have found are in the minutes of a meeting in 1966 of the Satyrs, a gay motorcycle club in Los Angeles. Author, editor, and leather historian Jack Fritcher has pointed out his inclusion and promotion of what I call proto-bears in his homo-masculine publications beginning in the 1960s. The Advocate claims to be the first to introduce bears in George Mazzei's 1979 tongue-in-cheek story, Who's Who in the Zoo. My research turned up gay men in numerous places calling themselves bears in the 1980s. It struck me that that was the zeitgeist. Bear identity coalesced in San Francisco due to several circumstances specific to the gay community there. At the time, the standard of sexual desirability was the Castro clone, young, smooth-skinned, and gym-toned muscles. Those of us who were older, heavier, and hairy were often barred from gay bathhouses and publicly shamed. When gay men with AIDS experienced wasting syndrome, aging and shriveling their bodies to the degree that they looked like Holocaust survivors when they were liberated from the Nazi death camps, the clones eroticized heavier bodies, reading girth as a sign of health, of being AIDS-free. As a kind of camp setup of the color hanky code, a way gay men signaled their preferences in sexual activities, some guys put a small stuffed teddy bear in their back pocket to signal that they were into cuddling. It was a rejection of self-objectification, of reducing one's values to mere sex acts. The genius of place of gay San Francisco lay in the fact that the Castro was a geographical home for community where we all crossed paths and our numbers were, I would describe as just the right size, large enough to be a community visible to each other and small enough not to be invisible in the vastness of a megacity like New York or London. Intersectionality. A gay man recently polled his Facebook followers. He asked, "What do gay men not talk about?" The answers formed a long list: financial education, loneliness, politics, biphobia, aging, alcoholism and drug addiction, HIV, misogyny, internalized homophobia, racism, sexual or domestic violence, spirituality, ableism, community, classism, materialism, transphobia, and fat shaming. These are also all things generally not discussed in the bear community, and they are also things not generally talked about in society at large. They tend to be discussed in small, specialized circles and addressed by those in the helping professions, spiritual communities, academic circles, and social justice activist groups. The bear community is a microcosm of society at large. Studying and recording bear culture and bear history has sometimes given me the false impression I am working my way toward a comprehensive overview. Sometimes I am amazed at how diverse we are. Our bear community is a site of convergence and interconnectedness. As a graduate student training to become a literary scholar, I repeatedly discovered social dynamics that are not being mentioned in the scholarship or noticed by my academic peers. This was apparent when I tried to articulate homoerotic undercurrents or dynamics of social class. This absence or invisibility shouted at me whenever my perspectives as a gay man or as a gay scholar were dismissed, trivialized, or blocked. Leaving literary studies behind to pursue gay history and doing so in a community of fellow gay and lesbian historians, I was invited to join the San Francisco Gay and Lesbian History Project, a mutual learning and support community where we studied, discussed, and analyzed our findings. Since queer work is inevitably political, we were all also gay and lesbian activists. In 1989, Kimberlé Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality in her essay Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics as a way to help explain the oppression of African American women. The idea of intersectionality existed long before Crenshaw coined the term, but was not widely recognized until her work. She created a way to think about our identities within a framework that describes how our overlapping social identities relate to social structures and oppression. Intersectionality identifies the interconnectedness of social categories such as race, gender, class, sexuality, and ability, all of which shape our individual group experiences and opportunities. In 1991, Crenshaw identified three aspects: structural, political, and representational intersectionality. Her approach calls us to examine power, elevate emotion and embodiment, rethink binaries and hierarchies, embrace pluralism, consider context, and make labor visible. Among the earliest gay and lesbian scholars who used this approach in the United States were my friends and colleagues and mentors, Alan Barabee, Gail Rubin, John D'Amelio, James Stakely, and Jeffrey Escoffier. Alan was an activist scholar who researched and wrote about gays and lesbians who served in the U.S. military during World War II, wrote essays on the intersection of class and race and gay culture, and about growing up in a poor French-Canadian working-class family. Gail's 1975 essay, The Traffic in Women, influenced second-wave feminism and early gender studies. Her 1984 Thinking Sex is considered a founding text of gay and lesbian studies. She has written extensively about the politics of sexuality, pornography, lesbian literature, and sadomasochism. She is noted for her anthropological approach to studying urban sexual subcultures, particularly the then contemporary gay men's BDSM subculture in San Francisco. John D'Amelio's 1983 Sexual Politics, Sexual Communities, The Making of a Homosexual Minority in the United States, 1940 to 1970, demonstrated how the rise of capitalism made homosexual relationships among working class people possible and laid foundation for the rise of homosexual community. Jim Stakely's 1976 homosexual emancipation movement in Germany was the first English language account of the early 20th century gay community and political movement in Germany. His 1974 essay, Homosexuals and the Third Reich, published in The Body Politic in Canada, introduced the English-speaking world to the situation of homosexuals in Nazi Germany and the Nazis' use of the pink triangle to identify homosexual men in the death camps. As one writer observed, quote, perhaps no other body politic article has jolted the imagination and political consciousness of gay activists and other readers. Jeffrey Escoffier served as executive editor of Socialist Review, a democratic socialist journal, co-founded Outlook, a national lesbian and gay quarterly, one of the first joint and gay cultural journals in the United States, and created Outright, a series of conferences that brought gay and lesbian writers together. As I mentioned, bears, bear identity, bear community, bear culture, are a microcosm of the broader queer community and even of society as a whole. Bears are arguably the first queer community to emerge through the internet. My recent research shows that the idea and the performativity of bears have spread to nearly every corner of the globe. Who identifies as a bear, how bear community takes shape, and what bear cultural practices may be are all inflected by the individual country's mores, customs, social practices, and sex and gender norms, among other factors, along with the intersectionalities of race, class, gender, and gender relations, ability as an ableism, body image, the effects of homophobia on self-acceptance, among others, the socio-cultural, socioeconomic, and other dynamics of each country calls for research and understanding of both native and cross-cultural manifestations of beardom. No doubt there are other aspects of beardom to be explored. And pardon my German academic paragraph long sentence there. Okay, visibility. Self-identifying bears began meeting at bear hug play parties, through personal ads in Bear Magazine, at the Lone Star Saloon, and through the internet listserv Bears mailing list. Under the banner of beards, bellies, and body hair, we found ourselves in community. We also connected through a gentleness, playfulness, cuddliness, protectively looking out for each other, and attempting to be at least relatively non-judgmental. Word spread through the gay grapevine. Bears in distant places came to San Francisco to indulge in the soon legendary underground play parties, or to be photographed for Bear Magazine, hang out at the Lone Star Saloon, or otherwise be slutty sexual tourists. American school children are taught the legend of Johnny Appleseed, an actual person from Massachusetts who set out in 1802 with a canoe full of apple seeds to sell to pioneers settling the then Wild West, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The moral lesson of the legend of Johnny Appleseed is, quote, to give generously and without discriminating, even if the gift is simple. Rather like Johnny Appleseed, bear visitors to San Francisco brought their experiences back home to other U.S. states, to Australia, Germany, England, Japan. Bear clubs and publications soon proliferated. Gradually, bears gained visibility in a loosely connected worldwide community. In the United States, awareness of gay bears percolated to creative types in mass media. For example, the Canadian sketch comedy show Kids in the Hall, which aired from 1988 to 1995, included a skit featuring a gay man being chased by what we now identify as a classic gay bear he had brought home from a bar. An early episode of the adult cartoon show Family Guy, which began in 1909, included a non sequitur scene of a gay bear expressing jealousy of his husband's new bear friend. Such appearances in mainstream entertainment established the gay bear as a trope. Tim Burrella's Leonard and Larry comic books cartoons, which ran from 1984 to 1992, found a special place in the hearts of early bears. Burrella showed characters of different gender identities, sexual orientations, ages, and sexual preferences as a community, and was noted for his representations of queer family structures, incorporating themes of domesticity and unique family structures. Readers recognized the blonde and bearded Larry as a bear and took an Epicurean's delight in Burrella's renderings of fears. We bears have become increasingly visible to each other through bear runs and weekends, websites, apps, and Facebook pages, Bear World Magazine, and other social networking platforms. Several documentary films have been made about us. Numerous narrative films have been made as well. We have been celebrated in the Bear City trilogy and in 7 seasons of Where the Bears Are. Many of us feel the time is right for the heterosexual mainstream to be educated about our existence, who we are and why we are. Los Angeles-based filmmaker and bear chaser Andy Langdon is currently working on a feature-length documentary about gay bears. He is taking great pains to present bears to the heterosexual world, balancing what straight audiences are likely to be open to learning and to portraying us as we understand ourselves accurately and honestly. If Andy succeeds, this film will be a major next step in our history. 6 years ago, I returned to my bear history work and have been documenting the evolution of bear identity under the ever-expanding umbrella of trans, gender-fluid, non-binary, lesbian, heterosexual women, two-spirit, and other queer folks who self-identify and find a home in the bear community in the United States. The vastness of our community and culture now is far beyond the scope of any one individual scholar's ability to research and document. As the organizers of this symposium have put it, both inside and outside of academia, scholarship on bears remains both scarce and fragmented. I am heartened and excited to witness and participate in this next very important step of today's symposium. Like Johnny Appleseed, the organizers are seeding the soil for academic and non-academic scholars, students, and researchers to create a multidisciplinary bear studies. Where do we go from here? Thomas Hemstad, an activist, journalist, and self-identifying gay bear from Sweden, recently interviewed me, it was in January, for the Ottar, an online Swedish language journal. One question he put to me was, what does the future of bear culture look like? I replied, this is kind of a Rorschach question. What I hope, what I fear, and what I think is most likely to happen are different things. Humans are social animals, and we always organize into social hierarchies. What I hope is that bears will continue to grow and become more accepting, embracing the diversity of our own sexual multiculturalism. What I fear is we will splinter further into rivaling factions, fighting over our places within bear social hierarchy. What I think is going to happen in the short run will be determined by what is currently unfolding in society at large. We are living through the unanticipated reemergence of fascism all over the world, and particularly in the United States. Queer people have long been one of the first demonized targets of far-right rulers. In some places, we have already been recriminalized, are being persecuted, and the desire to exterminate us is getting closer to being more than a desire. This has already happened in countries like Hungary and Poland, both in violation of the laws of the EU, of which they are members, Russia, Nigeria, Uganda, and the usual suspects in the Middle East. This is rapidly becoming the law of the land here in the United States, under the increasingly fascist and increasingly chaotic and mindless rule of Donald Trump. In times of need, people come together and help each other. I strongly believe the bear community and the queer community as a whole will pull together for safety, protection, mutual aid, and an organized resistance. In my previous draft of this speech from April 14th, I wrote, "We live in a dangerous and volatile time. From the time I began contemplating what to say at this symposium, the id monster in the White House has been steamrolling his way to making the U.S. a fascist police state. Some would say we're already there, ending globalism, throwing the world economy into chaos, and paving the way to removing everyone he doesn't like, dispatching them to concentration camps, such as in El Salvador. I doubt this is news to anyone here today. Political, economic, and social situations vary from nation to nation. In the US, Trump has already started kidnapping students and other undesirables from the streets in broad daylight. This has happened twice here in Syracuse, New York. He has been freezing or canceling funding to the most prestigious universities. He is already chilling academic freedom, threatening intellectuals, and has started a brain drain. 3 Yale professors have already left for appointments at Canadian universities. Today, May 14th, just 1 month later, I must add, Trump has been ordering DEI, that is diversity, equity, and inclusion, removed from all workplace policy, university culture, and course content in U.S. higher education. Harvard was the first university that did not immediately capitulate to Trump's orders and has begun a lawsuit to challenge him. Trump is already fully underway in dictating course content as well as funding for scientific research. The U.S. has been classified as a police state by some since Trump's 2024 election. Last Sunday, the new Pope Leo XIV warned that we are now in a, quote, piecemeal third world war. The short-term future for queer academics, researchers, independent scholars, writers, and intellectuals is coming into focus. Bears are a minority community within a minority community, and we bear scholars are finding each other for the first time here and now today. Sharing our passion for bear studies with each other is becoming, either by choice or need, the opportunity to network, to connect, to build an academic community, and to commit to keeping critical thinking and independent research going. In recent years, the bear community's practice of living in relative harmony in a multicultural queer community in the United States has been held by some as a model for both queer community and society at large. We are forging a new path in the academic world, and we can set an example for how to keep critical thinking and independent research going under even the most challenging of circumstances. As a wise person once told me, don't let the bastards get you down. Follow where the pursuit of knowledge and truth leads you, and may you find joy, as I do, in our individual and collective enterprise. Thank you.
Can I introduce you, Nick?
Sure.
Now
Okay.
it's my pleasure. Thank you, Les. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nick McGlynn, Senior Lecturer in Geography at the University of Brighton in the United Kingdom. The first time I heard about Nick was through a Brazilian gay website that featured an article about a researcher who had received funding to study the bear community in England. And that was that was news to me, that bear studies got somehow funding somewhere. And since the first contact with Nick, he was very open and remarkably free to collaborate with a younger researcher in the middle of his PhD. Nick is the author of the book Bodies, Boundaries of UK Bear Spaces, available in an open access online. He argues that understanding bear spaces through bodies rather than just identities is the way. His research also questions the common assumption that bare spaces are automatically inclusive to fat bodies, offering fresh insights into the complex geographies of this community. Nick, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for calling me old, very subtly.
No, sorry.
Okay.
I'm just younger, not
yeah,
that much.
Yeah, sure. So I've, as any kind of standard academic, I've prepared a slideshow. If you need to kind of zoom in, there should be an option at the top to change your view to speaker mode. Hi everybody. I introduced myself briefly already. Thank you so much, Ali, for that introduction as well. My name is Dr. Nick McGlynn. I'm a senior lecturer in geography here at the University of Brighton in the UK. I know that geography is not the discipline that people expect to hear from someone who studies bears. I'm not going to make this talk super geographic at all. But at the beginning, I do want to emphasize that attention to geography, that is to fieldwork at particular sites, to differences across different sites and at different scales, and to the mutual co-constitution of space and society. This is absolutely central to my work. So this talk is based on some research from my Bear Space project, which I will discuss in a bit of detail later, plus my wider reading of research and scholarship on bears. I feel reasonably comfortable in saying that I have read most published research on bears in the English language at least, and thanks to Google Translate, I've at least given myself a kind of cursory overview of some that's been published in other languages as well. Over the past 7 years, I've published findings from my own research on bears in several peer-reviewed articles for scholarly journals, and in a short and accessible report, and in the book that Ali mentioned, Bodies and Boundaries of UK Bear Spaces. That is an absolute rip-off if you try to buy it, but it is available for free online as an ebook. So the topic I'm discussing in this session is developing some of the work from my book, specifically about attempts to define bear, and even more specifically about attempts to define bears for the purposes of research. I'm currently developing this work further into a chapter for Les's Bear Book 3. Both that chapter and this talk are aimed at a general audience rather than an academic audience with any kind of grounding in social theory or in sexuality studies. So I'm not going to be introducing any strong theory here. For those who would be interested in hearing about my conceptual framework, it might be worth knowing that my thinking about bears draws on assemblage theory to conceive of bear as a wider material discursive phenomenon rather than as a simple category that just attaches to people. But that's not what I'm getting into in this talk. In this talk, I just want to show why I think that idea of bear as a simple category doesn't work. And so really I'm showing kind of what my thinking is moving away from, so rather than showing what it's going towards, I guess. If we stay in touch, which I hope many of us will after this, then maybe we can have those kind of conversations in the future. So I'm starting with this question that we always fucking start with. What is a bear? It foregrounds every non-community discussion about bears and many in-community discussions about bears as well, whether we're in academia or out of academia, or in research or out of research. So in What is a Bear Part 1, I'll talk you through what I see as the main ways that scholars have attempted to answer that question. Then in What is a Bear Part 2, I will introduce some real problems around attempting to answer that question. It would be perfectly possible to draw on, say, post-structural queer theory to problematize the question. I don't think that's even necessary. I think that just using empirical data gathered from bears and bear spaces is more than enough to problematize this question. So rather than using pure theory to examine bear as a category, I'm just going to guide us through an exploration of what seems to be actually happening amongst the guys in bear spaces, so that by looking at the empirical data, we will see the really clear and practical problems of trying to answer that question. Finally, in the third part of my talk, I will introduce some of the terminology that I found used across the Bear Space project and that I still see used in my own life. These include terms like beary, bearish, bear-esque, bear-adjacent, and others. These terms might seem to indicate people on the periphery of bear communities, existing somewhere in the kind of fuzzy boundaries or outskirts of bear. I'm going to argue that's not true, and in fact, that's kind of all there is. There is no pure bear from which bearishness or beariness are a dilution. We can only ever be beary or bearish, and we can be so in many, many different ways. And that beariness can and does change across space and time, both in the long term and in the short term as well. So I think that this inherent impurity of bear as a concept, as a category, is really critical for researchers to acknowledge and to work with rather than to shy away from. It means that simple yes or no binary labels by which somebody either is simply a bear or is not a bear is not going to capture the complicated and messy empirical reality of bear lives, bear communities, cultures, and spaces. I hate trying to explain what bears are. You can imagine that I have to do it all the time, but you kind of can't get away with it. So, writers on bears, as Les has already indicated, have repeatedly pointed out that there are no clear, universally applicable answers to it, and that even when these kind of definitions are come up with, they tend to collapse in the face of actual bear gatherings. So in this section, I'm going to provide some kind of general framing of that point. So I think one advantage that we have in trying to define bears or in attempting to answer this question is that there is basically no essentialist model to bother us with. That is, unlike other forms of categorization around race, gender, sexual orientation, other modes of social differentiation, virtually nobody believes that there is any universal essence that fundamentally makes somebody a bear, whether that essence be a biological one or a religious or a spiritual one. So the idea that a kind of born this way ideology could apply to bears, that somebody might be simply born a bear, is obviously nonsense, to the point that I've never encountered that belief in writing and scholarship around bears. Instead, we get another few key approaches, sometimes overlapping, which tend to be the main ways through which bear is kind of explained or defined. So the first big one is defining bear as an identity. So that is something that somebody actively describes themselves as and understands themselves to be. This is tended, I think, to be the default approach, especially when a writer is not explicitly trying to explore or refine definitions of bears. Identity is generally understood as something that is important to a person. One's identity as gay, one's identity as bisexual, one's identity as black, one's identity as a man. We expect these to matter. We expect them to, in some way, structure a person's life, to be important, to be significant to a person. Just bear that in mind for now, put a pin in that. Identities are supposed to matter to people. The second big approach understands bear to be a matter of either appearance or one's attitude, though actually generally we tend to see these operating together, so that being a bear is presented as a combination of appearance and attitudes. For appearance, that has tended to focus around bodies. I know there's we all know the kind of stereotypical bear looks of wearing plaids and denim and so on. I mean, certainly in the UK, I very rarely see that now, and actually it reads to me as quite camp in the UK, like this kind of camp retro look almost. Generally, when we're talking appearance, people tend to mean it's describing bears as bigger, hairier, often older. But I'm going to detail in a bit later some of the problems around those kind of appearance-based bodily categorizations. For attitudes, that tends to revolve around expressions and perspectives based on manliness and masculinity. But there's definitely plenty of appreciation of camp in bear spaces and scenes that some writers have picked up on, and other writers have expressed value for bears being able to bring together both the masculine and the feminine attitudes together. So that kind of combo of appearance plus attitude structures a lot of the kind of writing and scholarship around bears. So those are the kind of two big ways through which that question has been attempted to be answered. Now I'm going to introduce some of the difficulties of defining bears even through these widely used definitional approaches. So this is based on my own research that Ali has alluded to previously. My Bear Space project was intended to explore the experiences of fat, gay, bisexual and queer men in spaces of the bear community in the UK. Of course, I ended up collecting data in about much more than just that. Very, very briefly, the Bear Space project involved two phases. First, I generated a database of UK sites that could potentially be categorised as bear spaces. This included pubs, clubs, bars, social groups, temporary events and more. From that database, I selected 5 case study sites, one in London, one in Edinburgh, one in Manchester, one in Belfast, and one where I live in Brighton. Then I visited those case study sites. I collected data in them from between 2018 and 2020. So the data collection involved a series of on-site focus groups, so held at the bar or event itself, a series of off-site interviews to help people speak a bit more in depth, and also recording my own detailed ethnographic observations and experiences from participating in those spaces myself. In total, there were 32 participants, including bear community organisers and figureheads, and the final data set consisted of 868 pages of transcribed text. I did say previously I'm not going to get super geographic, but before I want to move into the next section, I really want to emphasise the UK specific nature of the Bear Space project. The UK's bear scenes are not simply identical to those of the USA or of those of Brazil or of France or of Japan or Taiwan or elsewhere. One key thing to bear in mind about the UK is the lack of fixed permanent bear bars here. So most bear stuff is based on temporary events and social meetups. I would argue there's really only 2 bear bars in the whole of the UK. Another thing to bear in mind is that most cities in the UK are not very big. And people do not tend to travel long distances to socialise as they might do in the USA. Outside of the largest cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham, it's tough to get a lot of bears into one space together on any kind of regular basis. So a lot of the bear spaces in the UK tend to be quite mixed in terms of who is present in them. It's difficult to be too specialist here. So in the following section, I'm going to explain 2 big practical problems in answering what is a bear that are particularly significant here in the UK in this context of temporary, ephemeral spaces and mixed populations. Okay, 2 practical problems. The first is indifference. Based on my analysis of the bear space data, sorry, I'm just going to move you all out of the way here. Based on my analysis of the bear space data, guys in UK bear spaces didn't really bother about identifying as a bear. A few did, but even for those guys, the strength of that identification varied really significantly. Here's a few just key examples of quotes that I've taken from the Bear Space project, demonstrating guys' relative indifference to either identifying as a bear themselves or being identified as a bear by others. So, Ross in Belfast, talking about his ex-partner, says, "My ex, he would have identified as a bear depending on his moods, or a chub." So for Ross, as with many others, he explained that a bear identity could be very, very context dependent. His ex might be either a bear or a cub in one context, or neither, or both. Other participants stressed that while they might identify as a bear in particular times and places, mostly when they were at some kind of bear thing, at other times and places, it just wasn't on their minds at all, and they didn't really identify as a bear outside of bear spaces. None of them seemed particularly bothered by this. I want to emphasize here that these guys were not just hangers-on or outliers of bear communities. They were not just on the periphery. The guys that were saying this were big bear community organisers, Mr. Bear contest winners. And in fact, there was a fair amount of resistance to identifying as a bear. Lots of guys stated that while they really enjoyed bear communities, that they went to bear spaces, they really liked them, they felt safe and comfortable in them, they actively sought them out. But in many cases, they were quite suspicious or even pitying of guys who maintained a really strong, significant bear identity. The other two quotes demonstrate what was actually much more the norm. That is, identifying as a bear as a matter of convenience. So let's take Robin from Brighton. Robin says, "I was just kind of given the label by others and I adopted that. I kind of just fell into it. Plus, I'm hairy and big. It's something I feel comfortable with, so I just go with it." Those phrases used there, he fell into it, and he just goes with it. Those phrases were used again and again by guys across the data set. There did not seem to be a strong, active pivot towards an internalized, deeply held, personally significant bear identity. Instead, over and over again, guys explained that they and others were not that bothered about identifying or being identified as a bear. They just went with it because those scenes and spaces felt comfortable, and other people said that, so they said, "Sure, I guess I'll call myself a bear." If we move to Justin in Brighton now, he offers some suggestion about what might actually be happening here. So he says, "There's always going to be big men who are getting older and want to fit into somewhere, who move on from being pretty and 25 from discos and nightclubs." So it's not just that bear spaces and scenes feel comfortable for guys, but they want somewhere where they feel they can fit into. For Justin, that was particularly about fitting in terms of one's age and one's body size, and that was again mirrored across the bear space data set. So the first big practical problem based on empirical data is that thinking about defining bears through recourse to identity, well, it seems that a lot of guys in UK bear spaces, often the guys that, to me, I thought of they would be the most classically bear, even the most stereotypically bear guys there. They just didn't strongly identify as bears at all. And even that could change across space and time in the long term and short term. It was more just a kind of matter of convenience because they liked those spaces and scenes and they felt that they fit in there. The second issue is about trying to use bodies to define bears. So when I asked people directly, or when people introduced the topic about what they thought made a bear, it did tend to revolve around bodies. Now, in some ways, that might seem really limiting. Like we've got this kind of tick box list that we're going through to define bears. So let's have a quick look at what Justin said about it seems to be at face value a fairly clear and detailed description about here's what a bear is. So he says, I would say they have to be hairy, with or without a facial beard. I think they would need to be someone of a bigger stature, so I'd struggle seeing someone a 5'3" bear. I think the sort of masculine stereotype, probably getting on to 6 foot, probably stocky but not sort of flabby, maybe a rugby player build, could be camp in a way, but it's not a chub. So initially, Justin's definition would seem to impose quite tight restrictions on who can be considered a bear, focusing on appearance from that attitude versus appearance approach. So specific physical traits, they have to be hairy, they are of a bigger stature, they are not flabby or a chub. He includes some personality traits as well, but when we look at the sheer volume of physical characteristics he mentions, so he talks about body hair, he talks about facial hair, he talks about overall stature, build, height, body fat, even muscle hinted at by that term rugby player build. Questions have to arise about the practical meaning of these terms. What exactly constitutes being hairy? What qualifies as a beard? What is meant by a bigger stature or a masculine stereotype? What does a stocky body look like, and how is that different from being flabby? These descriptions largely depend on comparing one body to another one. So if I consider my own physique here, next to somebody with a 28-inch waist, the soft, squishy skin that I have around my waist would probably be seen as flabby. I see it as flabby. But when compared to somebody with, say, a 48-inch waist, I might be described as stocky or as thick. That's the thick with the 2 C's. I can grow a full beard if I want to, and I've got a fairly hairy chest, but the rest of my body doesn't have much hair on it. I might be considered hairy next to a kind of a classic twink, but not to lots of other guys in bear communities. So given the numerous potential physical attributes or lack thereof here, and the kind of ambiguous definitions about what these attributes should be, defining bear through physical characteristics seems very, very open-ended, actually, from this supposedly very restrictive definition. We can also see in Justin's description loads of qualifying language. I tend to think, I'd struggle, sort of, probably, maybe, could be. So it opens up lots and lots of space for bodily variation. And that's what's happening. In bear spaces in the UK, there is a lot of variation of different bodies. The guys that I saw in the spaces, some of them were not particularly big or at all big. Many were not particularly or at all bearded. Many were not particularly or at all hairy. And even within those categories, big, bearded, hairy, there's a huge variety of bodies that can fit within each of those characteristics. Bearded could be everything from a guy with a carefully trimmed goatee to a 5mm chin strap to a half-meter full beard and everything in between. So it's very difficult to use bodies then to define bears because there's so much variance within what supposedly characterizes a bear. So what do we do with this? How do we, and here I particularly mean researchers, how do we kind of deal with the fact that loads of apparent bears might not really identify as bears, and that there are loads of very, very different bodies in bear spaces that do not match, either by appearance or attitude, what we're kind of told to expect? What I suggest is that we need to take this stuff seriously if we want to really study what's actually happening amongst bears, bear scenes, bear spaces, bear communities, and bear as a global phenomenon as it is now. So my participants were really aware of this stuff. Many of them casually used a large variety of new terms to instinctively refer to the ambiguity of who and what counts as bear. So we've got Daniel, who talked about a club night being very beary. Scott says, I started hanging out with guys who are bear adjacent, who would be termed otters and bears and stuff like that, hairy, beardy guys. Gerald from Edinburgh says there's a hotel doing something the night before that's bear-esque, so I might go up for that. And Arthur in Belfast said there's no set type at the event, it's bear-ish. So it's possible to read these maybe as saying that these are things happening at the fuzzy boundaries of bear as a concept, that this is the more ambiguous, uncertain, or even diluted stuff, and that there might somewhere be a pure, undiluted, totally complete bear. But as we can see from the two problems that I've introduced, it does seem to be that much of what and who actually makes up bear spaces, makes up bear scenes, makes up bear communities, is actually comprised of people and things that are bear-y, rather than pure, unadulterated bear. In fact, as bear scholars and writers have long pointed out, there's no one fixed definition. That pure and universally agreed upon bear does not exist. Now, when I say that we need to explore then these kind of fuzzy categorical boundaries of bear, yes, I am definitely saying that we should explore those categorized as on the outskirts or the peripheries of bear. But I'm also saying that we need to explore and reckon with the fuzziness of bear as a category itself, that all of us bears are always just bear-y. We're always just bear-ish. We're not complete pure bear. Such a thing can't happen. So we need to take this inherent impurity of bear, of the inherent instability of bear seriously. That does not mean, I think, that scholars have failed to properly study it, and I don't think it's a sign of corruption or dilution of some mythical pure bear. It might just be the actual empirical reality of bear as a contemporary phenomenon. To be clear, this is not some kind of attempt by me to queer bear or to somehow actively destabilize it or to actively blur its boundaries as some kind of political or activist project. We don't need to do that. There's no point. It's already happened. That bear has left its cave already. Instead, for me, this is just a serious response to the empirical reality of bears, of how people in bear communities and spaces actually, in practice, understand themselves and others to be bears, and what effect this has on particular spaces and scenes. It might also help us to develop new and I think more realistic methods and analysis in future research on bears. This would involve not treating bear as a simple, static and unproblematic category, nor a simplistic rendering of the bear community exclusively comprised of self-identifying bears with big beards and bellies. When studying bears, or bear as a kind of wider phenomenon, we can't rely on simple, neat classifications of guys as either simply unambiguously bears or as simply unambiguously not bears. Even if we were to come up with some kind of, I don't know, some kind of multi-factor quantitative scale to measure how bear somebody is, first, that would be unlikely to capture those temporal and spatial shifts in people's identification. But I'm also not sure that would be desirable. That seems loaded with the risk for creating new forms of exclusion. Finally, please don't imagine that I'm suggesting that we need to ditch bear altogether or to jettison bear as a concept or as a community in favour of beary or bear-ish. I think bear scenes, bear spaces, bear communities still matter. I think they're really valuable. I think they're really important. I want to kind of help them continue to exist. But because I think they're important, that's why I want us to explore and understand them better. So these overly simplistic bear, not bear framings wildly oversimplify our communities and they hide what's actually happening in and around them. So remembering that bears are always just beary, we're never pure or completely bear, will help us to understand the empirical, practical complexities of our bear communities. So thank you very, very much for listening, and I hope we can kind of continue these conversations today and over future days as well.
So can I begin, Vini? Vinicius Flauaus is a historian with a master's degree in social history from the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, and holds a specialization in contemporary cultural management. He is the author of the book Ursos, Filhotes e Caçadores, História da Comunidade Bear em São Paulo, in English, Bears, Cubs, and Chasers, a history of bear community in São Paulo, which explores the development and dynamics of this community in a urban Brazilian context. Since 2016, Vinicius has worked at the São Paulo Museum of Art, MASP, one of the most important art museums in Brazil, where he currently serves as operations supervisor. His research focuses on themes such as the city, imagination, body, masculinity, and homosexuality. Thank you so much, Vini, for accepting our invitation. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ale. It's an honor for me to be here. Listen, Le and Nick. It's a really honor to me be part of this project. I'm so nervous. This will be the first time that I will explain my theme in English. Most of the time I explain this in Portuguese, so be patient. I will share my presentation. So hello everyone. Thanks so much for being here. As Ale said, I'm Vinicius Flauaus, and today I want to take you on a journey through the history of bear community in Brazil, especially São Paulo, where I live, and we look how this identity, inspired many ways by North American culture, has been reimagined in a unique Brazilian way. The contents of this presentation, we started with the influences from the United States, how American bear culture has inspired identities in Brazil. Secondly, bears come to Brazil. We will discuss their arrival and the evolution of bear culture in Brazil context. I will bring a concept from the fields of social science and art history to draw a parallel that help us to understand where Brazilian bear community differs from its American references. And finally, we will look how Brazilian bears have redefined their identity, creating something unique. For the first time, I won't need to begin my presentation by explaining what a bear is. Thank you, Nick. This introduction usually takes quite bit of time, especially in research panels where we only have 15 minutes or 20 minutes to speak. We kind of lose this time explaining what a bear is, what community is. So I will skip to the influence from the US. It's not a bear thing, but it's a global. The Brazilian culture is inspired by the US culture since the Cold War and the Latin American dictatorship turned the United States into a new cultural reference point. Brazil already had already been consumed many images produced by Hollywood films and listened to music in English. It's important to note that due to the political context of Latin American dictatorships, the image of a bearded man has strongly associated with communism. As a result, facial hair was not promoted as part of desirable commercial male aesthetic. Particularly in magazines, we didn't find them. Emerging as a counter-narrative to dominant body, ideals with gay men spaces, bears, celebrate masculinity, body hair, size, in contrast to often youthful, lean, and hypertoned aesthetics promoted in mainstream gay media. Through the consumption of these rustic masculine images, there is a symbolic attempt to recover the traditional masculine values, the back to nature, as Les said, associated to rural men, without abandon modern practices of hygiene, body care, emotional sensitivity, and most importantly, the sharing of domestic texts, since there is no longer need to hunt or defend the territory. So bears, come to Brazil. The bear cultures begin to appear in the late 1990s via online content, international gay tourism, and important magazines. By the early 2000s, we had a first bear themed parties in São Paulo. Soon, blogs, social networks created a space for identity to evolve. There was not due to spontaneous local emergency, but part of a global circulation of media, people, and ideas. The internet plays a crucial role, as did tourism and gay publications that brought North American representations of bears to urban queer audience. São Paulo became the nucleus that identity expression in Brazil due to its size, cosmopolitan nature, and dense of LGBT population. São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro also, but I'm speaking about my city. By the early 2000s, bear-themed parties and spaces began emerging, like Vermont Bear, Soda Pop, and dedicated events such as Wolf, Bearland, and We're Sound began to formalize and celebrate bear identity in ways similar to those found in Western Europe and the US, but with a Brazilian twist. And I want to show some stories about our community. For example, we had a plus-size store called Sampa Bear, founded by Nelson Fumagalli. And it's very interesting because he was an artist and he draw bears in t-shirts, mugs, and to improve, to boost the sales, he started to give beers for their clients. But this is kind of proto meat, bear meat, in his store. Many visitors came to hang out rather than shop, and the closet was considered expensive at the time. The store became stigmatized as a bear-only space or a queer space, which discouraged non-bear and straight customers. With minimal advertising and high production costs, the business struggled and closed. Despite this, Nelson continued contributing to the bear community, organizing events like Mr. Bear Contest, before passing away in 2016. Another example of experience was Vermont Bear. Before Soda Pop, if the Soda Pop is the most known, the bear bar in São Paulo, but before that we had this Vermont Bear experience. It's funny because it's located in the same block as Soda Pop in Caneca de Prata bar. On Saturdays, the bar opened early and offered feijoada as a way to encourage daytime socializing. It's very specific from Brazil, but according to interviews, the bar shut down prematurely due to several management mistakes, such as charging an entry fee. It's very unusual practice for a bar in the area, so I won't pay to come in. As the result, the people started buying drinks from the neighboring bars and hang out in front of Vermont Bears, not drinking inside the bears, but buying beers around the neighborhoods and drinking in front of the bar. And then the owner started to sell the beers for this person outside of the bar, trying to making karaoke and drag shows, but gradually the people were was disconnecting from the idea of bar, and the bar closed. But here we have some advertising of Vermont Bar published in a G magazine. It's a gay magazine, not a bear magazine, but it's a gay magazine promoting this bear bar. And here we also have a bear tab. Probably he skipped without paying the bills, but we have the history. So we have a lot of, as Nick said, and not fixed parties or fixed spaces. We have some experiences, like Nick said, but nowadays we have our sound and bigger. We have some fixed parties in different spaces. I noted here, but I bring here in this page some experience, like Mafia Club was an experience trying to bring very masculinity to the scene. Bear Hugs, the bigger still until nowadays, the Bear Canto. The Canto was the nightclub, and they had like specific days for the bear community. It's very interesting, this experience. And the internet, it's various platforms such as BLM, Ursos do Brasil, Mirk, Fotolog, Orkut. It started around 1997 and into early 2000 were key to spreading the idea of being a bear, its taxonomies, the community in Brazil. These tools play a central role in motivating the organization of the first bear events and meetups. The first of these took place in Rio de Janeiro in November 1997 and in São Paulo in April 1998. Both were held in venues outside of the gay scene. In Rio, the event happened in a Barril 1800 bar. In São Paulo, at a bar in Jardins neighborhood. Following this internet-driven momentum, stores like Sampa Bear and Arouche in the Arouche area and the Extra Large on the Augusta Street began to emerge. In general, the parties and meetups were numerous and carried different names, most of them itinerant, with specific dates and locations, organized and promoted online. They could take places in different nightclubs or return to the same places depending on the date. But we have to spotlight this name, or sound. It's the most famous party, the bear party here in Brazil, founded in 2005, where sound began in Vila Madalena in Dynamite Pub, created by Daniel MS and Rodrigo LC. After Rodrigo's departure, Edu Atlantis joined it, and the party moved through several venues until finding a regular home at Hotel Cambridge, near to Anhangabaú station, where it's traditionally held. There are some curious stories from the past of or sound editions, such as the Gibas Feijoada and the Pasta Night in 2006, when the organizers experiment offering dinners before the party, prepared by their friends Giba. The idea was short-lived, happening only twice due to low interest. Another initiative was the Bear Corps, formed by a group of friends who began rehearsing in early 2011 and performed at Ursound later that year. The Corps gave a few more performances through early 2012 before disbanding due to the scheduling conflict. In 2010, Ursound had also held a matinee during the Trash 80s parties at Clube Caravaggio before settling at Clube Hotel Cambridge. And today, Ursound is a tourist reference in São Paulo, cultural scene. The event attracts over 3,000 people across two days editions during the São Paulo LGBT Pride Week. And it has also participated in major events such as Virada Cultural, and celebrate this year 20th anniversary. So it's the longest running bear party in Brazil, and perhaps even the longest running gay party in São Paulo nightlife scene. I risk to affirm. I bring one name. I choose to highlight Bispo because I consider this project very interesting, and he kindly agreed to be interviewed. And he's also a truly person, a lovely person. But it's obviously we have other important name in the bear scene, such as the unforgettable DJ Pomba, who sadly passed away recently. As well, Mauro Braz, who lives in Spain nowadays. Daniel MS, Thiago Pereira, Early Oliveira, who play in Our Sound. Rodrigo Boro, Gustavo Viana do Atlantis, who plays in Bigger Party. Chico Malagueta, Léo Villardi, who plays in Barbie Party. And we have a lot of names, but I bring Bispo. When he discovered the bear scene with DJ Catatal and Luis Careca, they wanted to make a bear party, and they experienced one bear party playing rock. It's not so common to see LGBT spaces playing other types of songs, so this is very interesting. And Brutus, it's a party that still nowadays inspired by Berlin nightlife, offering an alternative fetish and leather scene in São Paulo. Soda Pop Bar opened in 2010. The bar was founded by 3 partners and now run by Marcelo Silva and Pedro Jr., who left their former jobs to start the business. They choose a location in Avenida Vieira de Carvalho, who is affordably and central location. The bar built a loyal customer base with many regular forming friendships with the staff. During the Pride Week, holidays, and weekends, the area scene sees heavy foot traffic with neighboring bars and dinners competing for space on the sidewalks. So this is a fixed bear bar space. So in the context of São Paulo, we do have this fixed space and fixed parties. I bring this character, Beer the Bear. This comic is to remind that we have like a comic con for LGBT persons, authors, called PocCon. It's very interesting because it's the first LGBT comics and graphic arts fair in Brazil, and bring together artists and audience interested in art and comics. And in the 2024 editions, welcomed 18,000 attendance visitors. And PocCons offer an important space for visibility and celebrations of the LGBT culture with the art within the art world. Some artists from the bear community have participated in the event to showcase their work, including Mário César, Marco BYM, Sandro Manesco Jr., and Bruno Freire. So we have some bear artists in the scene producing right now. One example of short film, Professor Godoy, released in 2009. The story follows Godoy, a strict high school teacher, and his students' final year, who find himself in troubling situations when Philippe, one of his students, begin a game of seduction. Disturbed by provocations, Godoy must choose between giving into desire or upholding professional ethics. And notice the word wolf on Philip's shirts. So it's very interesting that okay, this is a bearish thing. It's okay. presenting some the Brazilian scene, I want to think about one thing. And what I wanted to bring here is Arcaipira, Cangaceiros, the Western or cowboys. We have this original US model that influences Brazil, the Brazilian Bears, was saturated with specific cultural archetypes. Masculine in the bear scene was often filtered through the lens of Americana, lumberjacks, bikers, truckers, and perhaps most iconically, cowboys. These figures evoke a rugged, working-class aesthetic simultaneously eroticized and valorized in US game imagery. They symbolize physical labor, independence, and rural resilience. Publications like Bear magazines and Wright's anthologies played a pivotal roles in shaping this imagery. They documented the growth of the bear identity and frame it within a broader queer discourse about the body, politics, age, and inclusivity. This iconography was aspirational and symbolic for many early bear spaces around the world, including Brazil. However, when these symbols crossed into Brazilian culture, not all elements is translated. Brazil lacks of romanticized cowboy traditions as the American West, while Brazil has its own rural archetypes like the caipira and the cangaceiro. These figures are rarely seen as sexual or aspiration in popular culture. They often symbolize poverty, illiteracy, or marginality, and are historically associated with backwardness rather than desire. So what reference do we have and what we make with it? So as the American Bears inspired the image of lumberjacks, bikers, trucks, cowboys, or working class aesthetics the Brazilian way, or do the Brazilians draw inspiration for its our rural or northeast masculine images or taxonomies? So I bring this book, Nordestino, A Invenção do Falo, the Northeast, The Invention of Phalos by Durval Albuquerque Jr., presents the regional types that shape the image of Nordestino, the Northeast man. The figure of macho, the macho Northeast, combine earlier social types as the sertanejo, who I try to translate some words like sertanejo, inland, rural dealer, praieiro, coastal resident, brejeiro, from marshy regions, and other figures that emergence later, such as senhor do engenho, plantation owner, cangaceiro, it's like a bandit, coronel, political boss, vaqueiro, the cowboy, matuto, rural peasant, jagunço, armed guard, retirante, migrant, and caboclo, mixed race rural worker. I try to translate some words that it's kind of identity. It's in our literature, in our imaginary. So my question is, do we, as a Brazilian bear community, do we inspired of our rural masculinities to bring to the bear community? This is an image of Pinacoteca Museum. In the foreground, we have these images. It's this piece called Museum of a Man of Northeast by Jonathan de Andrade. It's a Brazilian artist. And in the background, we can see Portinari and Almeida Jr. Paintings and Paulo Nazaré. So I took this image from the installation, and it's interesting because the artist Jonathan de Andrade published ads in Recife newspapers looking for workers who were interested in posing for a poster of this Museum of Men of Northeast. The work is interesting because it shows the strength and masculinity of men of Northeast Brazil and brings different views of masculinity and connects it directly to the themes that we are discussing in this presentation. So after reading this Albuquerque's work, the answer for my question, if Brazilians took our rural Northeast masculinity to dialogue with the Bear taxonomies, was negative. The answer is negative because these regional types are defined by their racial mixing, geography, territory, mostly rural, the types of labor, and their performance social class. We observe that the taxonomies and subcategories in the bear community are defined primarily in relation of body type, age, body size, amount of body hair, and caregiving dynamics, whether one gives or receives care. In Brazilian countryside, it didn't inspire the image of Brazilian bear culture. In this case, we imported these images and the expectation of North American culture to our group identification. But can Brazilian bears community replicate the masculinity and experience found in the United States? And this is the moment that I explain the title of this presentation. So why anthropophatic bears? This is a reference to modernism movement led by Oswald Andrade, who proposed the critical and creative absorption of external cultural influences to reinvent and create a strong Brazilian identity. The Abapuru, painting by Tarsila do Amaral, that inspired the Anthropophagist Manifesto, is directly connected to the concept of anthropophagy by symbolizing the man who eats people, derived from Tupi-Guarani words. So Abapuru means man who eats people. Within the context to anthropophagy, the Abapuru becomes an icon of the modernism movement, which seeks to devour and transform external cultures to create something new and authentically Brazilian, celebrating cultural fusion and reinvention as a form of resistance and renewal. It's not something new as an idea, but part of our tendencies, already discussed before. How we consume foreigners' cultures like noble cannibals who divorce the enemy to acquire their strength, but we don't imitate. We have a fusion of elements from different cultures, creating something new for our own. It's not a bear community exclusive effect, but a Brazilian cultural tendencies. But the reason that I bring this modernism concept to this presentation is to see what characteristics we produce and think the bear community as not something apart from the whole Brazilian culture and context. Brazilian bear culture is constantly negotiation between imitation and innovation. That's why I defend the Brazilian bear community has grown from cultural consumer to cultural producer, offering its own take on bear identity. It's generate its own stories, aesthetics, terms, and values that reflect the national culture, regional differences, and intersectional challenges like race, class, and etc. What I mean is Brazil is no longer just consuming bear culture, it's producing it. So, and I bring some differences, for example, how some American taxonomies are understood in Brazil and also came up during interviews. It's very interesting. One example that I noticed reading the books and making the interviews, it's how we understand the word chaser, caçador in Português. In United States, in reading the definition of chaser in United States, I don't know if it has changed, but a chaser was a man attracted to bears, regardless of his own body type, meaning someone can be both a bear chaser. In Brazil, however, the meaning has shifted based on body type and desire. A chaser is typically seen as a thin man who is attracted to fat men. And this thin man has body and facial hair, he may be called an otter, as in the American classification. But a thin guy who likes fat man, it's a chaser. A fat guy can't be a chaser in our context. Another interesting example is the daddy cubby dynamic. which reveals different gender expectation in relationships. In the United States, a daddy may be defined by age or by experience within the Barry community. It's possible for a young man who's been part of the scene longer to be called a daddy in relation to an older newcomer. In Brazil, this interpretation doesn't apply. A cub is always a younger guy, and that it's always an older guy. And as for black bodies, they are sometimes erased or else hypersexualized and fetishized. Even when individuals identify as a black bears, their body is often seen simply as a black bodies rather than black bears. As one interviewer put it, unless I'm acting flamboyant, I'm the big back. I'm the big black guy. But the moment I show any femininity, I stop being that and become the black fag. In Brazilian, I'm not the seria something like this. I'm not the black bear. I would be the bicha preta. In Brazilian culture, kissing at parties, it's common and relative frequently, especially in environments involving alcohol in nightlife. So it's seen as normal behavior in certain situations, such as nightclubs and carnival parties, where people tend to be more open to romantic and casual interactions. And this is, I felt, traveling to various spaces in Argentina, in Mexico, and Spain, in Portugal. In Europe, we don't see people kissing in bear bars or in bear clubs. Only in restrooms, it's very rare to us because we kiss in front of everybody. We kiss in bear bars, we kiss in the streets. So the bear community, it's more here in Brazil, it's more open to romantic and casual interactions. But it's not a specific for the bear community, but it's a Brazilian context. But it's also interesting to notice generational shift. The new generation of bears seems to have more relaxed and flexible attitude toward effeminacy or being perceived as effeminate compared to the bears over 35. For example, the scene of Barbie. We feel that the bears, the younger bears, feel more comfortable to express themselves, more diversity, and don't have problems to be effeminated than the other bears over 35 or over 40s, for example, that I noticed in my interviews. This is my references. And thank you so much for your attention. In fact, I wrote a book titled Ursos, Filhotes e Caçadores, which is available on Amazon. For now, it's only in Portuguese for now, but if anyone would help me to translate and publish my book in English, it'd be very, very good. If you have any question or would like to learn more about the topic, feel free to reach out me via email or social media. And thank you again. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. That's it.
Okay, so I think I think Phil is just asking us to mention the Bear History Project. Okay, don't worry, Phil. I was going to do that anyway. Okay, so thank you very much, Vinny, and to Les, and thank you to Moi as well. Thank you to everybody for coming and taking part. As I said at the beginning, Ale and I did not expect so many people to be interested in this, so we were really bowled over by the number of people who've joined us today. So thank you so much to everybody. So we've had several people now asking, like, where do we go from here? And I think that's kind of where Les kind of started us off as well. Like, well, what is kind of coming ahead? And I hope that those of you here will be interested in kind of joining conversations and maybe future research about what is coming ahead, where do we go from here, what is next. So to try to kind of continue these conversations, we're going to be sharing a link which will basically just sharing your permission to kind of contact you to stay in touch in future. We don't know what this is going to look like. It might be a mailing list, it might be an online discussion group. We're going to think about how to kind of keep these conversations moving ahead so that we don't just have this as a one-off thing, and that we can make this into something where proper discussions can actually happen. I do also want to thank again the sponsors that we've had. So we've been sponsored by my university's Centre for Transforming Sexuality and Gender, I'm so sorry, Ali, I've forgotten the name of your centre.
Center for Language, Literature and Culture.
Great, at the University of Aveiro, and also by the Bear History Project International, which Phil has popped the link for into the chat. The Bear History Project is accessible to everybody. There's a very large and active Facebook group for it, which you can look up and join. And we're developing all sorts of initiatives. At the moment, the Bear History Project is running an oral history project, which is interviewing, first of all, people in the US, but increasingly people international, to capture their oral histories of bear as a phenomenon so that these aren't lost. And we hope to be developing more outputs and work around that in the future as well. Some people have emailed me already asking about certificates for attendance. If you would like one, Alain stuck a form for that into the chat. I will circulate that link by email later on as well. So all that remains for me to say is thank you to Ali for organising this with me. Thank you to our two presenters, Vinny and Les, for joining us. Thank you so much to all of you for being part of this as well. And like I said, I hope that this is just a beginning of conversations and that we'll be able to kind of chat properly with more time available in the future as well. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody, and I look forward to staying in touch with as many of you as possible.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Vinicius. Thank you, Les Wright. And see you next time, guys.
Yeah, so wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, go get your breakfast, go get your lunch, go get your dinner, or go to bed. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.